Good evening. Today we have an important issue to discuss. The report will be presented by Savaliev Vitaly Gennadyevich regarding the prospects for implementing the North-South International Transport Corridor. Mr. Vladimir
Vladimirovich, I would like to address the core of the issue and ask you two questions.
Yes, please. First,
could you please elaborate on what our current official position is regarding U.S. President Donald Trump's initiative and proposal to establish a peace council? And second, what are our detailed assessments and future forecasts regarding our stance on the Siberian regional developments?
District of Greenland, Peace Council. We have indeed received a personal message from the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, inviting us to join the new international body, the Peace Council, which is being established at his initiative. In this regard, I would first of all like to thank the President of the United States for this proposal. We have always supported and continue to support any efforts aimed at strengthening international stability. We also note the contribution of the current US administration in seeking a resolution to the Ukrainian crisis. As for our participation in the Peace Council, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been instructed to study the documents we have received, to consult with our strategic partners on this matter, and only after that will we be able to respond to the invitation that has been extended to us. The proposal made to us primarily concerns resolving the situation in the Middle East and seeking possible solutions. It addresses the urgent problems of the Palestinian people and the resolution of the most acute issues. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. In this regard, I would like to highlight the main point. The main point is that the entire process should have a positive impact on the long-term resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the relevant United Nations resolutions, and that the necessary, the inalienable needs and wishes of the Palestinians are taken into account. This concerns the recommendation to reconstruct the Gaza Strip and its basic social infrastructure, healthcare systems, water supply, and to establish uninterrupted food provision. Therefore, even now, before we have decided on our participation in the composition and actual work of the Peace Council, given Russia's special relationship with the Palestinian people, we could, I think, send to the Peace Council $1 billion from Russian assets that were frozen under the previous US administration. By the way, the remaining funds from our frozen assets in the US could also be used for the restoration of territories affected by hostilities after the signing of a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. This possibility is also being discussed by us with representatives of the US administration. I plan to discuss all these issues with President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine, with whom I will have talks tomorrow, as well as with American representatives Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are also coming to Moscow tomorrow to continue the dialogue on the Ukrainian settlement. That's regarding this matter. Now, regarding Greenland, well, that doesn't concern us at all. What is happening with Greenland is not our affair. But we do have experience in resolving similar issues with the United States. In the 19th century, I believe in 1867, as we know, Russia sold Alaska to the United States, and the United States bought Alaska from us. And if my personal memory serves me correctly at this moment, the total land area of the state of Alaska is approximately 1,717,000 square kilometers, or perhaps even a little bit more than that total amount. And the United States bought Alaska from us for $7.2 million. Of course, these figures should be checked, but I believe that's correct. When calculated at today's current market prices, carefully taking into full account the effects of inflation over all of these many successive decades since then, that total figure would now be approximately $158 million. In terms of dollars, and the land area of Vineland is quite a bit larger in its total area. I think it is approximately 2,166,000 square kilometers, also with a bit of extra territory. So the total difference is estimated to be about, the count stands at 450, then 449, It covers an area of roughly 1,000 square kilometers in total size. So the price for Greenland would be somewhere around there, $200 to $250 million. If you compare it to the gold prices of that time, the figure would probably be higher, maybe close to $1 billion. But I think the United States could handle even that amount. And most importantly, Denmark and the United States both have their own experience in this matter. In 1917, Denmark had already sold, and the United States had bought the Virgin Islands. So there is such experience as well. By the way, Denmark has always treated Greenland as a colony, and rather harshly, if not to say cruelly. But that's a different matter altogether. It's unlikely anyone is interested in that now. But it certainly doesn't concern us. I think they'll sort it out among themselves. Let's move on to the main issue and give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian government, Vitaly Gennadievich Savelyev. Please go ahead.
Putin addressed Donald Trump's Board of Peace invitation publicly and said Russia is still reviewing the proposal, according to Russian state readouts and Reuters reporting. Speaking at a Security Council meeting, Putin said the foreign ministry is reviewing the invitation and Russia has not decided yet whether to participate. The response, according to Reuters, reflects Moscow's approach of maintaining flexibility while avoiding outright rejection of American overtures that could complicate future diplomatic engagement. The Board of Peace represents one of Trump's signature international initiatives since returning to the White House. Trump's Board of Peace was pitched around Gaza first, and Reuters says the draft charter expands it to broader conflicts across multiple regions. According to a draft charter seen by Reuters, the mechanism would operate as a platform for resolving international disputes and managing reconstruction efforts in conflict zones. Reuters says the draft charter ties permanent membership to a $1 billion contribution, with Trump serving as the board's inaugural chairman rather than president, as some reports initially suggested. Putin said the proposal is being reviewed and Russia will respond after that review, according to Russian readouts. The measured response maintains what some analysts describe as diplomatic flexibility. Russia has not committed to participation, and the Kremlin frames the entire matter as under review pending further assessment. This approach allows Moscow to preserve options while avoiding premature commitments that might constrain future negotiations on Ukraine and other matters where Russian interests are directly engaged. The careful wording of Putin's response reflects long-standing Russian diplomatic practice, according to foreign policy analysts. Moscow has historically approached major international initiatives with deliberation rather than rapid commitment, particularly when proposals originate from Washington. This pattern reflects concerns that agreements reached with one American administration may face abandonment or revision under successors, making careful assessment essential before formal engagement. Russian readouts say Putin raised Gaza and Palestinian issues in the context of the proposal, emphasizing that any peace process should address humanitarian concerns in the Middle East. The emphasis on Gaza, according to some analysts, positions Russia favorably with Middle Eastern and global South nations that have grown increasingly critical of Western handling of the conflict in recent months. However, the specific framing of Putin's comments on Palestinian rights requires verification from complete official transcripts before definitive characterization. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has generated unprecedented global attention, with international organizations documenting extensive civilian impact. Russia's reported emphasis on these concerns aligns Moscow with majority global opinion, as expressed in United Nations General Assembly votes on the conflict. This positioning, according to some analysts, strengthens Russian influence in regions where Western credibility has faced significant questions regarding consistency in applying international humanitarian principles. Reuters reports Putin floated using $1 billion from frozen Russian assets as the buy-in for the Board of Peace. This represents a notable diplomatic maneuver that positions Moscow as willing to contribute to international reconstruction efforts while implicitly challenging Western control over Russian sovereign wealth that has been frozen since 2022. Reuters says roughly $280 to $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets are frozen globally, mostly in Europe, and only about $5 billion is confirmed frozen in the United States. The proposal regarding frozen assets highlights ongoing international debates about their potential uses and legal status. Russian officials have described Western asset freezes as lacking United Nations authorization, according to Russian government statements released through official channels. The suggestion that Russia itself could direct these funds toward reconstruction represents an alternative approach to Western discussions about using frozen assets for Ukraine reconstruction without Russian consent. Western nations have debated various mechanisms for utilizing frozen Russian assets, with some proposals focusing on interest generated by the assets rather than the principal amounts. Putin's suggestion that Russia could contribute directly from these funds represents Moscow's position that the assets remain Russian property regardless of Western freezing measures. The legal and diplomatic implications of these competing approaches remain unresolved and contested among international legal scholars. Perhaps the most notable element of Putin's response concerned the Greenland controversy that has dominated transatlantic headlines in recent weeks. Putin said Greenland's ownership is not Russia's issue, according to Reuters, which notes he even floated a rough $1 billion valuation for the territory during his remarks. The statement positions Russia as disengaged from the dispute between the United States and Denmark that has generated significant tensions among NATO allies. The response differs from what some observers anticipated, given Greenland's strategic location in the Arctic, a region where Russia has invested heavily in military infrastructure and resource extraction capabilities. However, Putin's decision to characterize the matter as not concerning Russia avoids drawing Moscow into a dispute between NATO allies that is already generating significant friction without Russian involvement. Some analysts suggest this approach serves Russian interests by allowing NATO tensions to develop organically without providing a common external threat that might reunify the alliance. By stepping back from the Greenland controversy, Russia removes itself as a potential factor that could encourage American and European cooperation against perceived Russian Arctic ambitions. According to Reuters, Putin's hands-off approach may reflect several strategic calculations beyond simply avoiding NATO disputes. By declining to engage with the Greenland controversy, Russia avoids complicating potential negotiations on Ukraine and other matters where Moscow seeks American flexibility. Engaging substantively on Greenland could introduce additional complications into already complex diplomatic relationships. The Arctic region remains strategically important to Russia along its northern coast, where significant military and economic infrastructure has been developed over recent decades. However, Greenland sits on the opposite side of the Arctic from Russian territory, separated by considerable distance and ice coverage. Russia's primary Arctic concerns involve the northern sea route along its own coastline and resource extraction in areas clearly within Russian jurisdiction, according to strategic analysts cited by international media. American acquisition of Greenland, while expanding U.S. Arctic presence, would not directly threaten these core Russian interests in ways that would justify diplomatic engagement or opposition. This geographic reality may explain Moscow's apparent comfort with disengagement from an issue that primarily affects American-European relations rather than Russian strategic position. The reference to reviewing the proposal and potential consultation with partners likely refers to coordination with China, according to diplomatic observers familiar with Russian foreign policy processes. The Russia-China relationship has deepened significantly in recent years, particularly since 2022, and both nations have emphasized the importance of coordination on major international initiatives that could affect their shared interests. Reports from Beijing indicate Chinese officials have also expressed interest in understanding the Board of Peace proposal before committing to any position, suggesting potentially coordinated approaches between Moscow and Beijing on Trump's initiative. Neither government has indicated opposition to the concept, but both appear to be proceeding with careful assessment rather than rapid engagement. Some analysts say Putin is keeping options open, but Russia has not committed, and the Kremlin frames the entire matter as under review. This approach maintains diplomatic flexibility while allowing time to assess the proposal's implications for Russian interests and international positioning. The deliberate pace contrasts with Trump's characteristic emphasis on rapid decision-making and deal closure. The contrast between Putin's measured response and Trump's characteristic approach highlights different diplomatic styles that have defined each leader's international engagement. According to observers who have studied both administrations, Trump has presented the Board of Peace as a transformative initiative emphasizing speed, decisive action, and personal relationships between leaders. Putin's response emphasizes deliberation, institutional review, and careful assessment, an approach that reflects long-standing Russian diplomatic practice developed over decades. According to analysis in foreign policy publications, Moscow's cautious approach reflects accumulated experience, with American diplomatic patterns. Russian officials have expressed concern that agreements reached with one American president may be abandoned or substantially revised by successors, as occurred with various arms control agreements and international commitments. This experience has reinforced careful deliberation before commitment on major international initiatives where long-term reliability matters. Russian readouts indicate Putin raised Gaza and humanitarian concerns in the context of the Board of Peace discussion, connecting the initiative to broader questions about international conflict resolution. While Western nations have faced criticism regarding their positions on the Gaza situation, Russia has consistently called for adherence to United Nations resolutions on the conflict. This positioning, according to some analysts, strengthens Russian diplomatic standing in regions where Western credibility has faced questions. However, the specific extent of Putin's comments on Palestinian rights and their exact framing requires verification from complete official transcripts before definitive characterization. The general emphasis on Middle Eastern issues appears confirmed by Russian readouts, but detailed claims about Putin's precise positions should be attributed carefully to avoid misrepresentation of Russian policy statements. The Board of Peace proposal reflects Trump's broader approach favoring bilateral and small group arrangements over multilateral institutions, where American influence must be balanced against other voices, according to analysts who have studied his foreign policy patterns. The United Nations, where Russia holds veto power as a permanent Security Council member, provides Moscow with significant influence over international decisions on security matters. Alternative mechanisms that bypass the UN could potentially affect Russian leverage in ways that explain Moscow's cautious approach to the proposal. The UN framework, despite Russian criticism of Western influence within it, provides Moscow with guaranteed voice on major international security decisions that alternative arrangements might not replicate. However, Russian officials have also expressed frustration with what they describe as Western dominance in existing international institutions. According to Russian government statements on international governance, alternative arrangements that provide greater voice to non-Western nations or operate on different principles might appeal to Moscow under certain conditions, though the specific terms would require careful negotiation to ensure Russian interests are adequately protected. The invite signals a possible opening in U.S.-Russia relations, but both sides are still describing the process as exploratory rather than substantive, according to diplomatic observers monitoring the exchange. Much depends on the specifics of how the Board of Peace would operate, what issues it would address, and how decision-making authority would be distributed among participants with different interests and capabilities. Russian officials have indicated willingness to discuss details of the proposal, according to diplomatic sources, but have made clear that any Russian participation would require arrangements that adequately respect Russian interests and provide meaningful voice in board decisions. The billion-dollar contribution requirement raises questions about whether membership would translate into proportionate influence over board activities. The coming weeks will reveal whether Putin's response represents the beginning of genuine engagement with Trump's initiative or a diplomatic deflection that maintains distance while avoiding direct rejection. Trump's invitation represents a notable gesture at a moment of severe tensions between Washington and Moscow over Ukraine and related issues, signaling American willingness to engage directly with Russian leadership despite ongoing conflicts. And for the international community watching these developments, the interaction between Trump and Putin on the Board of Peace represents one element of a rapidly shifting diplomatic landscape where traditional patterns are being challenged. Traditional alliance structures face significant strain, new configurations are emerging among various power centers, and the rules governing international relations appear increasingly contested among major powers. Russia's careful response reflects Moscow's effort to navigate this uncertainty while preserving options and avoiding premature commitments that might constrain future flexibility. The approach balances openness to engagement with protection of Russian interests and diplomatic position. The Greenland issue continues generating tensions between the United States and European allies, regardless of Russian disengagement from the controversy. Putin's decision to characterize the dispute as not Russia's concern removes one potential complication from an already complex situation, but does not resolve underlying tensions between Washington and Copenhagen that show no signs of resolution, according to European diplomatic sources monitoring transatlantic relations. Putin's response demonstrates the careful approach that characterizes Russian foreign policy under his extended leadership, according to observers. By framing the Board of Peace invitation as under review, by raising Gaza while avoiding Greenland engagement, and by emphasizing deliberation while leaving doors open for future engagement, Moscow maintains maximum flexibility while assessing opportunities and risks. Whether this approach leads to productive engagement or continued diplomatic distance remains to be seen as both capitals assess their options. The initial exchange reveals both possibilities for cooperation and significant obstacles that would need resolution before substantive progress becomes achievable. The exploratory nature of current discussions leaves considerable uncertainty about eventual outcomes.